Okay, let's add our username field to the user model. At this point, right now we have just our basic, I think I could just go to users edit. We have our basic Devise setup, which is a name and an email, but I want to add or it's actually just an email, but we added a name with my template. I want to add a username to the app as well. So first we need to start with a typical Rails migration. I'll go ahead and add that to the mix. Generate migration. We'll say add username to users, and then we're going to say username. That's going to be a string, but we want it to be unique, so you can pass this additional parameter or option that's short for unique. And doing that means there's no two Twitter accounts that can have the same username, so that's kind of by design. Twitter does the same thing. So we'll run that command and it'll generate the migration. If we want to check that out, go to your DB folder. Inside it will be the new migration added. Notice there's an index now, but it's got a unique true statement at the end. So that's great. We'll run Rails DB migrate. And that'll get us the new fields we need. One step after that will be to extend both Devise to know about username on the controller level, and then also on the views, since we need to manually update that. So I'll go ahead and add username to both the sign up and account update options here. That's kind of just whitelisting these. So when you do create an account, you can go ahead and add those or update your account the same way. With that done, we need now to go to our views and add those fields. So we'll go to Devise, registrations. Let's see, it'll be new and edit. So I'll just copy this name field. Above it will be the name. I'll probably below name we'll do username, and then that will render below it once I render this page correctly. So I'll copy this over to edit. There we go. So now I got this field here. Again, I'm using my little view helpers here. I added those in my application helper file. Those come with my template. So the kickoff tailwind template has this stuff kind of just built in. Feel free to remove it if you want to just use proper tailwind in the themes or the views, but I found those are at least nicer to look at for the stuff that I basically only deal with once in the apps. Even though we added the uniqueness on the database layer, I want to do the same on the model layer. So we'll go back up to the user model, and I'll add this line, validates uniqueness of username. That makes sure that if anyone out there is trying to use your username and you already created it, it won't be possible. One step further, that should essentially create our setup for usernames. If you want to update your account, if you already created it like me, I'll just try that out, and that should give us, if I go back and verify users, edit. Now that data has saved, you can go one step further and say in the console and say user.last and see if that field exists. Got first name Andy, last name null because I only put Andy. Admin's false, and then username is just11 is my typical handle on the socials. Yeah, so that's it. Basically, we've created that. Now our profile can be, have that handle in the mix when we go back to the views to update that coming up. Now that we did the tweets validation, if you recall, I added the updated tweets form error handling in the controller. So this flash tweet errors. Rails doesn't know about that, so we kind of need to give it a place to know about it, but we need to actually ensure tweets are getting validated too. So since we're on a validation trip now, we can go back to the tweet model and follow suit here. So we've got our belongs to user already in the model. We want to go and validate a few more things. So we'll say validates body, and then length. We can say it needs to be a minimum, or let's say max minimum of 240. It's typical Twitter fashion. It used to be 140. They upped it. And then we'll say allow blank false. So essentially can't be nil once you created a tweet. So I'll go back to our app. In this case, if we did create a tweet, I don't think much would happen. We'll get this up here. And that's erroring correctly, but it's not rendering in the right spot. So we actually want to address that in the second here. Go to tweets, and I want these errors to render in line of the form, so like above the tweet in this field essentially. But right now it's rendering on the default flash, which is in our layout, and that's not right. That's not where we want it. It's right here is where it's rendering. And to circumvent that, I'm going to go back into our shared folder, into that flash notice file. Here's where all of our flash messages are coming back. I mean, it's kind of hacky, but I'm just going to say unless flash tweet errors are present. Basically, we could just say that, and then we'll render that. So wrap that around that whole flash block. Now, if we render it here, we'll tweet. If it's a blank one, it still won't create the tweet, but nothing else happens here. So we need to give the user some inclination what's wrong. So let's go back to the form, and then we'll update that in place. So the form is going to have this new tweet errors messages. So if form flash tweet errors, oops. Basically that exists. We'll do the same kind of conventions here. I don't really need this, to be honest. I don't really care how many there are. It's mostly just what they are. So instead of form.object.errors, we can say flash.tweeterrors.each. So I'll replace this with the same instance. And let's try this again. If you tweet without entering anything, I think that should be message, not full message. Actually, it should just be error. I had that wrong. Try that again. There we go. So now that's in the actual form. It's like in the context of the thing you're doing. So it's a lot more useful and not just in the random top bar of the app. Now you can make that more enhanced and not just like doing these conditional statements across the board, but for the purposes of this exercise, I'm just going to go ahead and run with it. Okay, so now we can update our tweet to include some useful data about the user. So if we have a username, instead of just the tweet body, we can say, or the tweet ID anyway, I could say tweet.user.name. It should give me, my name after the tweet itself. So if we wanted to, let's make these divs for now. Before I go forward, I'll update this to be just a list, and inside that we can render, I'll keep it as is actually. We could say divide y, and that gives us some lines between. We could say py, let's just p6 maybe for now, just kind of a placeholder. So that gives us our tweets. And if you want to go one step further, it gives you that. So then the username is below. Cool. So what about making the user have a profile image too? I think that's pretty crucial for Twitter. So let's do that. Luckily, that's kind of built into Rails. We don't have to do a ton of logic to make this work, but we do need to append some stuff to the model and then the views. So I'm going to call has one attached profile image, basically just saying, they'll have one of these. And what this means essentially is we're using something called active storage, which comes not with Rails, but you can add it to the Rails. In my template, I added it by default, so you should be fine if you're following along using that. But if not, you'll want to add action text or action storage, active storage. I get those mixed up. And make sure that all those dependencies are installed and everything else is working in that department. And then you can go ahead and just add this to your models, just like we are now. So with that in place, we could go and append that actually to the user as well. So if we go back to our application controller, and I'll just do one on update this time, and we'll say profile image. And I'll go back to users edit. We need to add like a field for the file to upload now. So I'll do that real quick. It'll be registrations edit in this case. And I'm going to put it at the top for this, and I think it'll be a file field, and we'll call it profile image. And I'm going to remove the input class because this will be kind of a custom one. So I'll go back to refer to my notes. This is going to have quite a few classes, so bear with me. Block with full, text small, text slate 500, file. This is part of Tailwind's fanciness. You can get into the file fields for file py2, file border none or 0, file text small, file font semi-bold, and then file bg sky 50, file text sky 700, and then hover will be file bg sky 100. So that gives us this new look and feel. I believe I forgot a rounded full. File rounded full. There we go. And some padding too, I think. Cool. So that gives us a place to put our file or profile image in this case. So I'm going to go find some image here. It's going to get that. If I update this, you need to include your password for this to work. So update that. Now it should have saved. It doesn't mean you can see it yet, but if we look in the logs, I believe you'll be able to see some uploaded active storage stuff going on. So that should give you some clues that it did work if it was possible. If you don't have active storage installed, of course that won't work. So you need to, again, make sure that is. But right now, if we want to render that, we totally can. Let's first start with profile page, though. I think it might make sense so you could go see your own tweets. So we'll get back to actually rendering that in a second. Let me go and create the concept of a profile. So I don't really need to create a model in this case. This is going to be based off the user account. If you did want to get sophisticated, you could have a user model and then a profile model that has different data on the user, and they could like share logic in a way. But for the purposes of this guide, I just wanted to make it pretty simple. So you're just modifying the user data instead. Only need that for the most part. So, but I want like a dedicated page to go to a profile page like you see here. What we want to do is first start with the routing, and I'll add a resource profiles. We really only need a show version of this, but I'll keep it open-ended for now. But with that in place, then we need to add both the controller profiles controller RB class profiles controller extends from application controller, and we'll just say it's show. Then we could say profile equals user. We're just finding the user in this case, params ID. Gives us a starting point. And then we can update our application file to go and click to that profile. So in this case, I want this link to actually go to it. So let's go back to our layouts, application. And if you remember before, I commented this out, but this is going to be adding it back. So with the new resources routing in our routes, this right here gives us the helper method to pass the link through. We do need to pass the current user through. That'll give us a way to actually link to the right one. So here I'm assuming there's an ID getting passed, and we're able to pull that in, get the right user, and it'll say, if you click that link, it'll go to a show page. We don't have that yet, so let's create that folder, profiles, and then show. Cool. And let's go and render that accordingly. So if we go real quick, I want to make sure, yeah, we're doing this if the user signed in. So if only they're signed in, we'll see that, which you have to pretty much be signed in to use the app. So it's more of Redundant check, but it's okay. Okay, so with the show page, let's add some markup here. I'll just make it pretty simple to start. This page should re-render. There we go. Center, justify, between, flex 1, flex, items, center, space, x6. So here is where we're going to have this new little helper I'm going to call profile image. And I'm going to pass in the profile and size. You could call it large. So you can extract a lot of logic away from your views should you want to. And that's an example of doing that there. I'm going to add that method in a second. First, I'm going to wrap up what the UI looks like here. So say class, font bold, text 3XL, and then we'll just do profile name, which essentially means the current user's name. You could also do the username if you want to. I'll do that below though. So what in like true Twitter fashion, it's like the @ sign, and then you can just do some Ruby to append it to profile username. Okay, and then below all this, we'll say edit profile, which will take you back to that user's edit path we were already at. I just don't want to have to make people type it. So user's registration path that's given to us by Devise. The more you use the Rails stuff, the more those will just come naturally, like when you're typing. I've noticed it took me a while to fix, it took me a while to learn all those and then finally apply them. You have to refer to everything all the time, but now finally I can do it almost in my sleep. So item center, px5, py2, rounded, full border, ring 4, focus, ring, sky 50, ring transparent, hover, ring, sky 50, hover, border, gray 300, and we could just say if current user. So only the person signed in as this user should be able to render this. So we're going to get errors because we don't have that profile image yet. I'll fix that in a second. Just want to finish this up. We'll render all the tweets for this user. So list none, divide y, negative mx 6 to offset the padding we added to the whole mix. Margin top 10. Then inside here we'll render a collection. We can't quite do the like tweets thing here. Kind of needed to be a little more explicit. So I'll say collection. Then we can say profile tweets and pass which partial you want. So in our case, I'm going to just use the tweets partial. And that should give us what we need. Okay, so let's go add this helper method. I'm going to go into my helpers and do that. Since it's a globally thing, probably like a profile image is pretty much everywhere in the app. Let's add it to our application helper. Just make a new one method below. Say profile image. It'll be a little sophisticated of a helper, and that's okay. I kind of want it to be. So we're going to pass in which user is going to come through because we need to get the user data to actually render it. And then you can pass in like customized options. So if you ever want to extend this, you could do so. In this case, I'm going to just pass a hash of options, and then we'll have to like assume we know which options to pass. You probably, if you have a team, you'd probably want to go ahead and document that somewhere so people know, or let the code do the work for you. So we're going to do a case switch kind of statement. So we'll say options. We're going to assume there's going to be a size attribute if you want a different one. So we could just say when large, we'll render certain classes. So we'll say W20, H20, when small, W10, H10, and then when, or we'll just say else, which will be like the default. So if you don't pass anything, this will go ahead and render this size. 14. And then with that inside here, we want to go a little further and say, make some classes dynamic here. So we'll say, we'll set that size class and then some tailwind stuff. So we don't want it to shrink if it's flexed. Rounded will be full for all images. Border to border white. Then finally we could actually render the image. So we'll say if user.profileImage .attached, assuming they uploaded one, else that. So we'll say image tag user.profile image, and then we'll pass our classes through. So classes using that local variable we defined. And then I'll do, if there isn't one, I'll render it like a third-party image. I found this one. It's kind of goofy, but HTTPS doodle. Oh man, this is all kinds of messed up. I'm gonna grab the code real quick. Feel free to copy and paste like I am, or use some other service, whatever you want to do. And then we'll do the same with the classes. So classes. And now, assuming our spelling's correct, edit user registration path. There we go. Now we get our thumbnail, which is looking good. So let's see, there's some bug with the UI here. Let me double check. Let's take that back out actually. Right there. There we go. Okay. This should be rounded. It's spelled wrong. And then I want some spacing here. Does that work? Yeah, there we go. Might make that a little lighter. Cool, cool, cool. So that's what the profile look like. If you click edit profile, now we go back here. You could display the image here if you wanted to, assuming it's attached. I didn't go that far, but I'd probably do that on a real world app. So that gives us our profile ready to rock and roll, which is great. And then we see our tweets on it too, which is cool. Let's go ahead and update our tweet partial. So now we have the profile image, the tweet itself, and then also some controls. So we'll get those in place. And then after that, we'll start getting into territory of like retweets and likes and whatnot. So let's update that tweet, and then we'll probably go to the next part after that. So we'll start here. And I'll just do px6 py3. We'll have another div just kind of following suit with our profile image. Flex space x3 items start pb3. Inside there we'll have a div that's we don't really need flex shrink, but we'll do the profile image tweet user in this case. So the actual tweets user, now we get that back. So it's me, because I've been the only user so far creating tweets. Pretty lonely here. But we'll add next the p-tag class font bold. That will link to the tweet.user.name, so my first name. And then profile path will be tweet. There's another link to our profile. Class will be hover underline. And for this specific case, like any link in a Rails 7 app, or at least using the Rails Turbo gem, Turbo Rails gem, every link's going to be hijacked basically by Turbo. So in our case, I don't want it to be in this particular link. So you can say data Turbo false on it, so it stops that logic. So that should give us a link to our profile. We'll need to address the UI here in a sec, but then we'll have our pros, and then pros large, just to see, and we'll put the tweet body. Then below that, we'll have controls that are going to be just what we're calling static ones for now. In fact, I'm going to copy and paste over this. Okay, so we've got link to tweet. We'll come back to this part. I'm going to just add like a span 3 to kind of get the style right. And below that, we'll have, again, I'm going to delete this for now and come back. Let's make this a link. Sorry, I'm like showing you what will be, but it makes more sense to see that like gradual changes as opposed to the final ones, I think. Okay, and quantitative likes, we'll fix this up too. We can ignore that for now. We can get the main icon here. And the last one, similar stuff here. This will be a delete icon, so I'm gonna I'll come back. And render that. Let me go through the mix here. The comments are going to be essentially taking you to the tweet itself. We don't have the show action yet, so I'll add that. And then, of course, likes will like the tweet. And then the trash can will only display for currently logged in users and people that actually authored the tweet. So we're doing some of that logic here already. So we're saying first for the delete action will be if user signed in, the current user is indeed the tweet author. So essentially just checking if the user ID matches the tweet ID, tweet user ID. And if so, then you can delete it. And then the like one will be anyone could add that. And then the retweet, we aren't displaying at the moment. That's for people who are not me. So if, assuming I'm going to go create a second account, I'll call it johndoeexample.com. Oh, I need to say sign up. John Doe. Let's just say Doe. Create that account. Now you can see the retweet icons, but you can't see the trash can. So that's actually good. So if I create an account or tweet, excuse me, now I'm using my other profile image because it's the dummy one. It looks like the list is rendering the incorrect order here. I'll fix that. But all in all, we're in good shape as far as the controls that should be present. Like now on my own tweet, I can't retweet my own tweet, even though I think on Twitter you can do that, but I didn't build it that way. So I will go into the controllers real quick and make sure this is ordering correctly. Yeah, so there we go. So if I create one, the next one's in line. Good. Okay, so it's starting to look more like Twitter now. That stuff is super static. So in the next maybe the next video, we'll incorporate these controls more so we can actually do those things. And then, of course, leverage Turbo to do them in real time. Hello Rails is my new course on Ruby on Rails. I'll teach you Ruby on Rails from the ground up. Visit hellorails.io for more information.